Alright everybody, this is going to be my guide video on the 1176 peak limiter. This is my second in this series that I'm doing where I'm kind of exploring audio equipment that I find interesting. So this is another super famous audio compressor. This one designed by Bill Putnam in 1967. It's kind of a cool compressor. It's one of the first ones to use all solid state technology. It's funny to think now in the age of all these digital things that back in the day, a lot of things that they were trying to do was get rid of noise and everything was noisy. So this one is one of the first ones to have a solid state circuit. And the way it uses its compression is with this thing called a FET or an FET. It's called a field effect transistor. So we'll go into how that works a little bit later. But basically, yeah, this is an extremely popular compressor. It's famous for a very good reason. Even without using any of the compression at all, a lot of people put sound straight through it without doing anything to it, and that actually puts a sound. A lot of people like it on vocals, a lot of people like it on drums. It has a few different modes, which we'll go into. And yeah, so basically it has a very aggressive kind of bitey attack sound. So you can change the timing. You can clamp down on your signal super fast, or you can do it kind of slowly. So the way it works, I'm not going to go into it too deeply like we did with the LA before, which uses that light. This one, the FET, the field effect transistor, basically it works by there's kind of like this field, a channel that the audio has to pass through, and depending on how the gate is affected with a certain voltage, it changes the conductivity of that little channel. So basically, in a nutshell, you can kind of change the resistance of this channel, and that's what affects your signal. So it's super cool. It's also program dependent. So this machine has a little more, has ratios, it has attack times, it has more things that you can set than the LA2A, but still it has that program dependent kind of vibe. The amount of the compression, it has a fixed threshold, and you're basically adjusting the amount of compression by setting the input signal. So just getting into the anatomy of the 1176, now that we know that this field effect transistor is basically what's affecting our signal, we'll look at the front faceplate, and these are the knobs that you're actually going to be touching to affect the signal and set the compression and set the sound as you're using the 1176. If you look at these two knobs on the left, you have the input and the output. And basically the input, you could see it as kind of like how much of the sound of the 1176 do you want to put. So you could put in just a little bit, or you can put in a lot. The higher that input means basically you're going to be activating kind of like the circuits of the 1176. The way it's all dependent is based on that input knob. So whatever signal you're putting in, the more input it is, not only will the signal be, I guess, higher, louder, but it's going to have more of the 1176 sound. So if your input's really high, it's going to be a really high output, so you're going to want to turn that down to maintain the level. If you have a very low input, you might have to turn the output up to maintain your level. So basically, like we said in the other video, whenever you have a signal coming into this thing, you basically set how much input, how much sound you want in it of the 1176, how much of the signal you want affected by the compressor with the input, and then the output one on the right there, you're going to adjust it, either turn it up or turn it down to match your signal, what it was before you did all the compression. Those other two knobs there, they're different from the LA2A, of course. It's the attack and the release. The attack, if you go all the way to the left, it's actually off, and all the way to the right is the fastest. And same thing with the release. So the attack on this thing, since it is a solid state, the numbers that it had is completely crazy compared to all the other compressors from the 60s. It's around 20 microseconds, which is very, very fast. Even the slowest is pretty fast as well. So this thing is just on another level compared to the old school optical kind of compressors that were out there at the time. So to the right of the attack and the release knobs, you have your ratio settings there. You have 4 and 8 for the compression, and 12 and 20 for more of like the limiter side of things. Okay, so for those ratio buttons there, the 4 and the 8 are more of the compressor settings. So for every 4 dBs that your input signal goes up, your output signal is going to go up by 1 dB. So that's the compression there. So for every jump of 4 dB up in your signal, it's actually, when it comes out the other end of this compressor, it's only going to go up by 1. 8 is similar, right? So it's going to have 8 dB of your input signal going up. It's going to spit out only 1 dB. So that's going to be squishing your signal there. A big part of this compressor is kind of like its aggressive character. It has like a bright in your face character. So a lot of times people will use that for vocals. A lot of times they'll put it in line with another compressor. And last thing with the ratio buttons, one of the funny things about this machine is kind of famous. You could push all 4 of them in. That gives it kind of like a all buttons mode or British mode. It's very aggressive. It kind of fucks with the electronics a lot. So the bias and everything gets all out of whack. And that one is just a very aggressive kind of distorted sound. It has a ratio anywhere from like 12 to 20-ish. It kind of jumps around. Has a slight delay too on the attack. So it basically puts the machine in this weird mode, but it also has like a really good character. A lot of times that's good for kind of like ambient mics on drum kits. Also good for vocals too. It's definitely something to try out. Even the plugins, most plugins now too will have this mode because that's one thing that's kind of famous about it. So it's a bit chaotic, it's a bit crazy, it's a bit distorted, it's a bit in your face, but it's a cool sound that this thing can do. It's one of the many reasons that people like to use it. It's a very versatile compressor. And one last thing on the front faceplate here, one thing that I thought was kind of funny when I was kind of looking through the instruction manual, they said that if you actually have the meter on and you're monitoring the output gain instead of the gain reduction for that needle, it actually changes the sound as well. So one cool thing about all these old analog kind of equipments, especially with a field effect transistor or circuitry like this, is a lot of the circuits are connected. So as you mess with things and move things around, it's not in isolation. A lot of times changing one thing is going to change the other things. So, changing your ratios is going to affect the attack and the release. And, these things are subtle, but they do all kind of affect each other. So it makes this piece of equipment pretty cool because it's a little more organic in that sense. So I'm just going to show some examples of this thing in use. We're going to do kind of just extremes so you can kind of hear the extremes of what this can do. We'll have one example here where basically we'll just have the input really high and the output low to match the signal in the end. And you'll be able to hear what this thing sounds like when it's really saturated versus having low input and high output. And that way you can hear kind of like a signal that's kind of being affected by the machine, but mostly passing through as well. One thing to note here is that just even if there's no compression at all, it does change the sound. So on this next example, we just have this kind of like drum loop here. And I'm just going to kind of show off the different ratios and try to maintain the attack and release somewhat consistent and maintain the saturation consistently. But just so you can hear how the different squashing effects happen with the compressor. As the ratio goes up, it becomes basically a limiter. So those are the examples of the 1176 in action. It's a very famous compressor and almost every producer has some sort of version of it, whether it's the hardware or a plugin. One thing of note on this compressor is there's a lot of different revisions that have happened over the years. Each one of them is different. A lot of times they've changed either the output transformers or they've changed a lot of like noise reduction kind of properties. So there's many different revisions. There's the A, B, B, C, D, and E, F, G, H, and finally the special limited edition AE, which is pretty cool because it has the blue stripe and it has a ratio of 2. So if you want to know certain things like the revision A, which I know UAD's tried to model and it's kind of hard to recreate, but basically it has a kind of like an old school output transformer that's a little noisier. The AB, they tried to change some resistors and tried to make it a little less noisy. You have B, which isn't too much of a difference. They went to bipolar transistors in the preamp, and you can see that there's just small little changes that happen. They change a lot of the transformers. They're allowing power transformers. A big thing about this compressor is like the output. You can really drive things extremely hard with this. Like even in the manual, it says it can almost act as like a mic preamp almost, because it has about 40 dB of gain in there that it can actually push. It can push signals quite loud. So even if you have a quiet signal, you can really raise it with this if you want. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I definitely recommend having some sort of 1176. You can squash signals, you can have slow attacks, you can do a lot of different things with this. It has a distinctive sound. Definitely try it on ambient drums, try it on vocals. If you have any recommendations for any other piece of equipment that I should explore in the future, please just comment it below so I can kind of see if you guys want me to kind of do a deep dive into any other form of equipment. Or if you want me to elaborate more on this compressor, let me know that too, and we can go even deeper if you want. Thank you.